In the beginning, there was silence, and then Bach said, "Let there be sound."
A note, or a tone, is no more than a series of vibrations in the air which move at a constant, measurable rate, which we call frequencies. A note on its own means absolutely nothing. Take this B flat here. What does it mean? Is it happy? Is it sad? Where does it want to go? Who knows? A lone trombone tone on its own is unknown. As soon as you put two or more of these tones together, your ear is able to hear the ratio of the two notes' frequencies in what musicians call a musical interval. The ratios between notes set the foundation for tonal music. Other music exists, like drumline music and the majority of percussion music, but for the purposes of this video, we'll be talking about tonal music. As a general rule of thumb, simple ratio relationships will sound more pleasant to the ear. Other than the octave, the Western perfect fifth, with its ratio of 3:2, is considered the strongest interval in Western music, and as such appears in practically every tonal system in the world. But music's been around for thousands of years, with some flutes dating back to 43,000 years ago. How did we tune our instruments before we had the ability to measure frequencies? Short answer, just use your ear. Now this might be hard to conceptualize, but forget all the music you've ever heard in your life. Start from scratch and pick up your bass. Plug a string. Now sing, gliding up for the note you started on until you hit a note that sounds like it locks in with the note you're playing. Odds are you'll arrive at the octave, perfect fifth, and major third. This is because these intervals have simple ratios which your ear is able to identify. These frequencies appear in a concept called the harmonic series. If you lightly hold down your finger on certain areas of the string, a new note will pop out that is related to the fundamental note by a whole number integer. What you may not notice is all of those notes are playing when you pluck the string, but your brain perceives it as only one note because of how it interprets data. So now that you have 3 notes in your scale, where do you go from here? This is around the point that cultures differ a bit, is between these 2 notes. Is it? Or? If you pick the first one, you might notice that the 2 notes sound a bit dissonant when you play them in tandem, but if you play them in passing, it sounds quite nice. In fact, those are the first few notes of the rag in Indian classical music called Hamzadwani. That's analogous to the Western idea of scale. Alright, at this point I gotta talk about harmony, because it hasn't always meant what you think it means.
So do you know what harmony is?
It's when people sing together and it sounds nice.
Yeah, that's 100% correct.
The first sentence of the Harmonics by Aristoxenus reads, "The branch of study which bears the name of harmonic is to be regarded as one of the several divisions or special sciences embraced by the general science that concerns itself with melody," which music theorist James Tenney translates to say that in the pre-polyphonic era, the concept of melody was much more important than our current understanding of chordal harmony. This rings true for some genres that we know of, like Indian classical music, which puts a lot more emphasis onto melodic development as opposed to harmonic. Many examples show a single performer singing or playing over a drone.
My name is Praharshitha, and I have been learning Indian classical music, more specifically Carnatic music, for 11 years now. Indian classical music, we focus on melody more than anything. It has to do with the fact of, rather than teaching it as an art, it's mainly used to pass down culture. And you know how a tune gets stuck in your head when, one day you listen to something and it's just in your head for the rest of the day? That's kind of how it is.
There's no tuning device.
There really isn't.
Trying to compare Carnatic music to Western classical music is like trying to judge a computer by how fast it is in miles per hour. It's just the wrong metric.
We kind of believe that every voice is unique in the sense that if we teach you a song, one person is going to sing it differently, slightly differently from others. And I think that's the beauty of it. The fact that it's imperfect. There's no true way of doing things. There's no set way of doing things. And I think talking about like how something should be mathematically correct just completely takes away from that.
So up until this point, the majority of tonal music found its notes through the approximation of filling in the gaps between benchmark notes. A thorough understanding of exact intonation wasn't too necessary, especially when you're only playing in one key at a time. There were academics at the time who were exploring the idea of mathematically derived pitch, most notably Pythagoras. Yes, the triangle guy. The story goes that Pythagoras was walking down the street and he heard two blacksmiths hammering away, and he noticed that it sounded quite nice. He measured the two hammers and found that they formed a 3-to-2 relationship. Although realistically, the math doesn't work out that well with hammers, he was probably using an instrument called a monochord, which is basically just a single string over a resonating box. What's interesting is philosophers like Aristotle and his student Aristoxenus wrote in disagreement with this idea. Aristophanes wrote, "We hold that the voice follows a natural law in its motion and does not place the intervals at random, and of our answers we endeavor to supply proofs that will be in agreement with the phenomena, in this unlike our predecessors. For some of these introduced extraneous reasonings in rejecting the senses as inaccurate fabricated rational principles, asserting that height and depth of pitch consists in certain numerical ratios and relative rates of vibration, a theory utterly extraneous to the subject and quite at variance with the phenomena." This is the 300 BC equivalent of saying, just feel the groove, man, it's not that hard. Which only really works if you've been living and growing up inside of a temperament your entire life, and doesn't help at all if you're trying to adopt a foreign tuning system. But let's try the Aristoxenus approach anyway. So we already agree on those 3 notes. That sounds like a happy medium between the root and the third. And now, transpose that up a fifth, since the fifth is so strong. Congratulations, you just invented the pentatonic scale. Except not really, Chinese musicians have been using that scale for thousands of years before the Europeans invented it. Now, let's try the Pythagorean idea. Pick a root note, go up a fifth. This is easy to tune because it's the same as the third harmonic on a string. Do it again, and 2 more times. Then smush all those notes down so they're in the same octave. It's the pentatonic scale again, same as Aristoxenus. Although you might note that in this tuning system, the third is a little bit too sharp, but it's close enough, and now you have a mathematical way to derive your notes. In fact, if you do this a total of 12 times, you'll eventually come back to the note you started on. This is how early Europeans derived the first chromatic scale. It's not exactly perfect, it includes a Pythagorean comma. This is due to the fact that when you stack fifths, the top note is ever so slightly too sharp than the note you started on. But if you put the comma in a good place and just promise not to play in some keys, everything will be fine. So when early keyboard instruments were invented, like the clavichord, this is how they tune their instruments, with Pythagorean tuning, putting the Pythagorean comma somewhere around the F sharp in a key where you're probably not going to be playing anyway. This has the bonus effect of each key having its own personal characteristics, but the negative effect of you just can't play in some keys. An extension of this is mean tone temperament, invented by Francesco Gaffori in 1496, which spreads out the Pythagorean comma over the entire keyboard by flattening the fifth by a tiny, tiny amount. Now, if you take that idea of spreading out the comma over the entire instrument to its logical conclusion, you'll come to 12-tone equal temperament, where the distance between every single half step is exactly identical between every half step on the entire keyboard. The mathematical ratio of this is the 12th root of 2, and was discovered by Marin Mersenne in 1639, although it was also discovered by Simon Steven in the early 1500s. I guess he just didn't say it loud enough. So, that's the system we use today. 12-tone equal temperament has some weird quirks that composers like to exploit, like the fact that 12 is a highly composite number, which means that it can be divided multiple ways. This allows for techniques like the whole tone scale, diminished and augmented chords, and tritone substitution. But it's not quite perfect. Major thirds are slightly too sharp, perfect fifths are slightly too flat, and wind and string instruments can make these adjustments on the fly. Same as singers, they just have to use their ears. But we can do better. There's an entire community of microtonal composers who are experimenting with alternate tuning systems, like the artist Sevish, who's experimenting with music in 17 EDO, 22 EDO, 31, 53, all the way up to 313 EDO. This means he breaks up the octave into different numbers of steps, hence the name EDO, which stands for equal divisions of the octave. This stuff is wild, a little weird at times, but unlike anything you've ever heard before, because the vast majority of music we usually listen to is in 12 EDO. Every tuning system has its own advantages and disadvantages, which are reinforced by the music they're used for. For example, European classical music is super triad heavy, so it benefits from just intonation, while a microtonal keyboard is super unwieldy, so they benefit from the workflow of a digital audio workstation, as in electronic music. I think this solidifies music as an art form first and foremost. While we might think of the 12-tone system as just a musical fact, it hasn't always been this way, and could continue to evolve as the musical landscape develops.